Welcome in to another episode of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we have a lot to discuss. Don't want to waste too much time because I have an absolutely awesome interview for you guys here today. We've got Katie Windham of BamaCentral is going to be joining the show. We talk about Bruce Pearl, no longer the Auburn coach. We talk about Jalil Bethea's injury. We talk about the upcoming Georgia game, her new podcast venture. So there's a lot of things coming up on the show that I think you guys are really going to enjoy. But a couple of housekeeping things here up at the top. As always, if you're not subscribed to the channel, if you could do so, I really would appreciate it. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers, and I know about 80% of the people that watch these videos are not currently subscribed. So if you could do me a favor and drop a subscribe, I would appreciate it. As always, if you hear any ads on Apple or Spotify, that is because I am a part of the Believe Podcast Network, and anything you could do to help out those sponsors, I would appreciate. As I mentioned, I interviewed Katie Windham not too long ago, earlier today, and it was a really, really fun interview. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. So do me a favor and check out the interview that I did with Katie Windham. And I am joined today by none other than Katie Windham, at Katie Windham _ over on Twitter. She's a writer for BamaCentral that covers Alabama basketball, football, and a ton of women's sports as well. How you doing today, Katie?
I'm doing great. It was nice having a bye so early in the season. Got a little bit of reset and refresh along with the team. So it was nice to be back up at the complex today. But yeah, I'm doing well.
Yeah, and we will definitely be talking about that game upcoming. Alabama gets the bye before Georgia. I'm sure fans are anxiously awaiting what everybody's thoughts are. I know the media has been spinning up about it for a lot. Obviously, we got some big news with some returning players, so we will talk about that shortly. But, even though this is an Alabama show, funny enough, I'm going to start the show with something that's not Alabama related because about 12:30 today, we got some breaking news, and that was that Bruce Pearl was going to be stepping down and that Stephen Pearl was going to be stepping in as the head coach at Auburn basketball. This is some news for anybody who's been following this pretty closely. I think a lot of fans that follow it really closely knew it was a possibility. They knew that he had been kind of contemplating his Senate run. I think the most surprising thing to me is that in his video, he said he wasn't going to be running for Senate, right? For me, it wasn't even the fact that he was stepping down. It was the fact that he wasn't going to be running. What's kind of your thoughts on that? What have you heard, in the circles, I guess, so to speak?
Yeah, I kind of wish we had there was a camera reaction inside the media room today when that news broke because we were all still up there working from post football stuff. So it was kind of funny, the first person that holds up the tweet and then we're all like, whoa, because it's not unexpected. It has been floating around there, but the main reason has been, that he was going to run for Senate. So it is interesting. And I think that, there's been lots of content on Twitter about it today from Auburn fans, understandably, and then also Alabama fans, because Bruce really did help elevate, the basketball in the state. And I wrote a story back when it was going to be the 1-2 game in February, I guess, in Tuscaloosa, kind of about how we got to this point of these two programs, being so good in basketball. And I think they did spur each other on. And so it's hard right now I think for most of us to imagine that Auburn will be as good under Stephen Pearl just because he doesn't have any experience except under his dad. But then, his dad was a really successful coach in multiple places. So maybe he's learned a lot. I think Alabama fans are excited that Bruce has done because of what he's been able to do with Auburn basketball. But I think that it's interesting now to watch too if Auburn's able to retain its whole roster, kind of how all that works out, because it is interesting timing that Bruce waited until right now, the day that practice starts, and he could have ridden off into the sunset after a Final Four and said, this is it. But then, coaches doing Nick Saban just retired on a random Wednesday, I'm pretty sure it was. So some coaches like to do the whole retirement tour, and then some like to do it in their own timing. So I think the timing is a little interesting for Auburn. I wouldn't be super excited if I was an Auburn fan about the timing of it, but I don't think too many of them are too upset at him just because of what he was able to do for their program.
Yeah, and I think personally, my thought around the timing is I think that the timing as much had to do with potentially him trying to set Steven up for success. Because I think Bruce knew, anybody that's followed that program for a long time knew that Steven was the eventual successor to Bruce. And I feel like by going through the whole offseason, he's fully, and again, school's already started. People have been enrolled in classes. Technically, yes, the transfer portal window is open, but some of Auburn's top players, Todd Pettiford, Keyshawn Hall, are making enough money that Auburn can still afford to pay them. It's not like somebody else is going to be able to step in this, soon into the season and be able to pay them. So, I feel like it was very strategic that it's not Steven competing against, Alabama and Indiana and Kentucky and all these fan bases that are trying to go after top talent on a even playing field. I think that Bruce intentionally made it an uneven playing field where Steven could kind of just step in. And it's, again, like you said, like he's been very successful. He's going to be revered, and that's, he took him to 2 Final Fours. Like he's going to be revered on the Plains for a long time. I just thought that was very interesting. Like you said, it was just kind of a random Monday 12:30 drop of, oh, Bruce Pearl retired. and again, it was just very funny to me. Obviously, Jacob Pickle has made his, Twitter jokes about like saying that this is going to be happening. And again, a lot of us kind of had heard of this. I think, like I said, I think the Senate piece was just a little bit more surprising one to me. But there was another piece of news. A lot of news has dropped since my last episode with Max Barr, and it was just recorded on Friday. So a lot of news has happened the last couple of days. But some more unfortunate news for the Alabama basketball team. And Yay Alabama and Nate Oates announced that Jalil Bethea had an injury and had to have a surgery, and it's not going to be a season-ending injury, but is going to be missing a couple of weeks of the season. That was originally all we had heard. I have heard some potential rumors that it may be something as simple as a broken toe that had to be fixed, and that he may not miss quite as much time as I think some people obviously jumped to conclusions when it all came out. Have you heard really anything about that? Obviously I know that Alabama's going to be without him for a little bit of the season, but what are, some people kind of saying about that injury front?
Yeah, I've heard something similar about the toe. And I will say with Nate Oates in regards to injuries, in some ways he's more upfront than like Kalen DeBoer with football injuries, but then also Nate will like just kind of straight up lie about how long a guy's going to be out. Like he'll be like, yeah, it's going to be like months. And then like 2 weeks later, he's on the court and you're like, so, who knows what to expect with this injury or really how long it'll be. I think they like to be like cautiously optimistic and like give it a longer date than like it's really going to be with a lot of these injuries, because like they don't want to have the pressure of like rushing a guy back. But it's almost like there's this weird like, I don't know, hex on Alabama basketball that these guys every offseason there just has to be like the random injury that's going to like keep a guy out from the start of the year. It's like Nate has had so much success with some transfer portal guys, but then also like so many of these transfers come in and get hurt before they can even play. And it's like they eventually get to play, but it is a little weird that we keep having these offseason injuries every year.
Yeah, and based on kind of what you're saying right there, based on some of what I've heard, this is not the first time I've heard, oh, this is a nagging injury that Nate has almost urged the player to get fixed. Like, hey, it almost feels like Nate is prioritizing long-term health and long-term success of the player and long-term ability to compete throughout the course of the season, knowing that it's a very long season, over having somebody available for a gauntlet in November, right? Because if anybody hasn't seen the schedule, we've talked about it on this show. It is an absolutely brutal November, and even if you are optimistic on Jalil's return, he's going to miss a couple of games. And the second game of the year is against St. John's. So, I mean, at a minimum, he's going to miss some very large games. So I think that's, it really speaks to Nate's, thought about what he cares, how much he cares about the players and cares about the long-term success, because, he could very much be like, no, I have to have you. Like, you're just going to gut through it for the season. And it really feels like, again, like this isn't the first time you've heard this is a nagging thing that he kind of urged them to get fixed. Maybe this is something more than that. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but it just feel like I've heard that a couple of times with some of these injuries.
Yeah, that's another thing about Nate Oates is that, like, I mean, and to be fair to him, like, there's not necessarily a great incentive to be super honest with the media about like injuries because of the competitive advantage, and then also just like kind of what does he gain out of it. But he is with players, because every year there's guys that might need to redshirt for whatever reason, for medical reasons, or just like they're not going to get the playing time. He says he leaves it up to them and their family. He kind of lays it out for them. Okay, like, here's what's best for you. Here's how much your playing time you're probably going to get, and like here's what needs to be fixed. And it kind of seems to be the same way with some of these nagging injuries, that like he's kind of upfront with guys about this is what's best for you, and he's really looking long term what's best for the player instead of maybe some of the immediate needs of the team. Because like you hit on, it is Alabama never just kind of slowly dips into the season with NATO scheduling. It's especially this year, it's going to be tough. And so of course you'd like to have a guy like him, but I think Alabama also has other options at guard, and I think that's where getting Houston Millette back after some of his injuries he went through when you weren't necessarily expecting him to have another year. Latrell Wright's the same thing, that it kind of helps with some of the other pieces they have in place.
Yeah, and kind of what you mentioned right there, for Alabama fans that are kind of question, Jalil Bethea obviously is kind of the new noteworthy piece on the transfer portal. Him and Taylor Bowen were kind of the diamonds in the transfer portal. Not to speak poorly of the other two guys by any stretch, because I think that Keaton and Noah are going to make some contributions, absolutely. But I do think that Jalil Bethea and Taylor Bowen had immediate starter type implications when they were signed to the roster. And, so a lot of people are going to question, what happens to the roster now with Jalil Bethea. And in my mind, I think that comes from three places. And you mentioned two of them. I think that Houston Millette, he is obviously a huge impact, getting him back for another season. Me and Max Barr talked about that. Like, Houston Millette is a guy that, by anyone who's ever talked to him has said he's probably going to be a coach someday. Obviously, his dad's an athletic director. He's grown up in athletics. He's got a really good head on his shoulders. Like, really, really cool to listen to if you ever listen to his podcast and stuff. Like, I really, really like Houston. Latrell Wrightsell, again, another guy you're getting back from injury that you didn't fully expect. Neither one of these two guys, it's kind of odd that you're replacing the one injury with two that are coming back from injury from last season. And then finally, I think Amari Allen. And I think that Amari Allen is the guy who you've heard the most, some of the most raved by the coaching staff out of summer practice. Some of the things, people that have been to summer practice, you've heard really good things about him. But I think just that size, I think that he is going to be a perfect size to kind of slide into that Jalil Bethea role. Will he be a starter? No, right? Like, I would expect Houston or somebody to definitely step into the starter role. But I think that you're definitely going to see some extra minutes out of Amari, early in the season because of the, hole that was left by Bethea.
Yeah, and like we already talked about with all the injuries they've had in the past, this isn't like a new problem for Nate to figure out about where to like plug and play guys. So he kind of has experience with fitting guys in where they need to go when, or kind of making the most out of the lineups he can with who he has available.
Absolutely. And I also would say it's kind of a standpoint of, it's a very different predicament when the guy is injured going into the first game of the season than if they get injured the week, the day before or something. Like, Nate Oates is somebody who, from an analytics perspective, he knows what his best lineups are. And so if he has time to prepare on not having a guy, like, I'm completely confident that he's going to be ready to go first game of the season. This is also why you recruit guys and get Houston Millette and Trelly and all these guys back, because Nate Oates has had enough injuries that he's suspecting somebody's going to go down. You don't want it to happen. You hope that you can go season injury free, but realistically, somebody's going to go down. This is a sport that has injuries, and that's just how the game happens. And he doesn't want a single injury to kind of derail the whole season. So I think that Nate fully prepared for this in constructing the roster. And so, I think that they're more prepared for this than they would have been, in other seasons to a key player.
Yeah, which is kind of a hard balance in college basketball these days.
So kind of while we're on the...
Oh, sorry.
Mm-hmm. Keep going. No, you're good.
He's not going to fill like the 13 scholarship spots most years, just because most guys don't want to be number 12, 13 on the bench, but you do have to have guys ready too. And that's something he's been able to do really well the last couple of years, is roster management, construction, and making sure you kind of have those guys ready in case other guys go down.
No, absolutely. And like you said, it's a very tough thing. It's something that I think that Nate has done some of the best in the country about it, because he's really embraced, he gives everyone a chance to play the minutes, right? Even if you're number 11 or 12, like, you're going to get out there. And, we have seen in multiple instances where a guy gets out there and he's 12 on the roster, but he plays really well and he earns himself additional minutes. So it's kind of a situation where it feels like Nate has an idea of how he wants to play with the roster, but then he doesn't let his preconceived notions control how he's going to actually dictate the roster. And I think players, are very happy about that and are open to allow him the chance to, be coached by them, or to coach them, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
So when we're talking about injuries, let's kind of shift over to football because injuries is kind of part of the theme of today's episode. You have two guys that are actually coming back from injury. Kalen DeBoer officially announced that Tim Keenan and Jam Miller are going to be available for this Georgia game. What kind of, obviously this is a huge jolt to both the offense and the defense. Tim Keenan being one of the more vocal leaders on the defense. And then obviously having your lead back is always good when you're going against an insane Georgia defense. What are kind of your thoughts on getting those guys back? Obviously, I think they've been practicing and getting prepared to get to this level, but what kind of impact do you think it has on the first game back?
Yeah, I think it's interesting today that they told us for sure right away that they're going to be back because Alabama is not the most upfront with injuries, like I kind of talked about earlier uh, with Kalen. But we talked to Kane Womack first this morning, and I asked him, like what it would be like or what Tim could bring even if he plays in limited reps, and he was like, "Oh, he's playing." So I don't know if Kalen necessarily wanted them to get that out today, but it was let out with Kane, and then he was asked about Jam and said he'd play too. So I think with both those guys, they're obviously seniors. Tim Keenan's one of the captains. He's somebody that, they're both players that their teammates really respect. So I think their leadership is huge. I think their experience, that they're guys that have played in these SEC matchups in the trenches. I saw, apologies that I can't remember who it was. It may have been Nick Cully or it may have been a national person talking about the Jam Miller's two receiving touchdowns have come against Georgia, both in huge games. He had that. I think it was a wheel route in the SEC championship, and then it may have been last year too in the regular season. So he kind of historically plays well against Georgia. The rushing offense has really struggled the last couple of weeks. Like if you look at their running backs yards per carry, it's especially if you take out that long AKD or run against ULM, it's pretty bad. Like and Wisconsin kind of has a good defense. It's hard to know about Wisconsin after you saw what happened to them against Maryland. And I can't say I watched that game, but just kind of looking at the box score of it. And then ULM's, not great. And so the fact that like you couldn't really run the ball against a team like Louisiana Monroe is kind of concerning going into a matchup like Georgia, but you also haven't had Jam Miller. So, and I think it goes, to the running backs and the offensive line blocking. It's kind of a combination of both those things. But I think offensively, Grubb said today that having better success in the run game takes more pressure off of Ty. And I think what we saw in week 1 against Florida State when things kind of started to fall apart is he was putting too much on himself of, well, I've got to make this play down the field. Like I've got to make the throw. And then it led to some bad decisions. So I think having Jam back helps him with that. It also helps him pass protection, things like that. And then Tim Keenan on the defensive side, you're going against an SEC offensive line for the first time. And Kane Womack even said today that Keenan, he's a big guy. He's kind of known for plugging up the middle of that defense, but he's gotten better in his pass rush. And that's something that's been a huge emphasis for Alabama all offseason. They talked to us about it all throughout fall camp. And then the first 2 games were kind of a dud in that respect. And then against Wisconsin, I think they had the 4 sacks. So I think Keenan brings you some versatility inside. I don't know how many reps he's going to be able to play on Saturday. I mean, Kane sounded very surefire, like he's obviously going to play. We don't know how much, but I think just having him on that defensive front, especially with the Beeman injury, some of the other issues they've had on the defensive line, I think will be huge for this defense.
I think it also speaks to both of those positions, but like you said, because of the Beeman injury, both of those positions currently are being led by younger people, right? Both the running back room and the defensive line currently have underclassmen now. Well, Kevin Riley has done a great job, but he's still more of an underclassman, right? He's been here a couple of years, but he's an underclassman. In my mind, it's also a standpoint of you're getting 2 guys back that have been on the road in the SEC, and they're going to be able to help, calm the nerves and quiet. And it's, I think that honestly, not having Tim Keenan there for the Florida State game, not that it changes the impact of the game, but I think that matters, right? When you're missing a vocal leader on the sideline, I think that absolutely matters. And so I think having both of those guys back is a massive, massive deal. I also think that when you're talking, if you're talking about the offensive side of this, I do think that the running game, I think it partially has to do with the running back. When you were talking about the offensive line, I'm actually curious. I'm curious as to your thoughts. I personally mentioned at the end of the Wisconsin game, and I think that you saw kind of an ongoing right tackle battle during that game because Wilkin Formby gets pulled and Michael Carroll comes in. And then, Ty had some better, it felt like we got more movement in the run game. It felt like there was a little bit better pass protection when Carroll was in. Do you think, and, the answer may just be you're not sure, but do you think that Michael Carroll gets the nod in Athens on Saturday, or do you think that we go back to Wilkin Formby and, Wilkin gets the nod until proven otherwise and we have to slide in Michael again? I know in Athens on the road is a tough one, but I think the freshman deserved it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Wilkins going to get the nod for the start, and then I think Michael Carroll's still going to play because Ryan Grubb was asked today, are they still going to rotate along the offensive line? And he said yes, which is interesting because we talked last week to players towards the end of the bye week. The media schedule and the practice schedule were different because it was a bye. And Caden Proctor said, like, we've got to find the best 5 guys. We've got to find the right combination. And the coaches have been telling us we're going to keep rotating guys. And so I asked him, do you think it's a good thing to keep rotating all season, or do you need to find, a set 5 for continuity? And he said at first you can keep rotating, but it's better, for us if there's the same 5 guys. But for this week, Grubb says they're still going to rotate. So I think that'll be at right tackle and then also the guard positions. And I think I was talking about this with my coworker today. It's odd to me because I've obviously I've never played football. I'm not a huge X's and O's expert, but I would think, because last year Alabama kept rotating along the offensive line almost all season long, but it was a different offensive coordinator. Grubb is like an O-line guy. Like, he's been an O-line coach in the past. I would think he would want it to be a set 5. And so I don't know what the reasoning is. I don't know if it's today's age in college football and the portal, and you want to keep as much depth as you can. You want to keep as many guys happy as you can. But you would think at the end of the day, you're going to play the 5 guys that are going to give you the best shot at winning. And so I think just because they've had Wilkin start the first 3 because he has more experience, because it's a road SEC game, I think Wilkin will start at right tackle, but I won't be surprised at all if we see Michael Carroll. In fact, I'll probably be more surprised if it's Wilkin the whole time at right tackle.
It kind of to your point when you're talking about Ryan Grubb, I think that if I remember correctly, Kalen DeBoer was asked similarly at the beginning of the season about the rotation along the offensive line last season. And he was like, oh, no, I don't think that's really going to be the case this season. And then through the first 3 games, that's been absolutely what we've seen, and part of that has to do with freshmen stepping up and other, Jaden Roberts getting back healthy. And there's multiple contributing factors to that. It's not as simple as, oh, we went from not rotating to rotating. But I do think that it's very interesting that it really feels like, to me, it feels like Wilkin was the option they expected to go with, but Michael Carroll has been so good throughout practice that it's we just have to give him the reps. I understand that he's good and we didn't want to rotate, but Carroll's been elite. He deserves the reps.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the case. And it was interesting talking to Caden last week because I think it's pretty well documented how good of friends he and Wilkin are just off the field and have been since their freshman year. And so he's asked questions about Michael Carroll. He's asked about the rotating, and it's he's being honest, but also it's that's his best friend. So I think sometimes we forget about the personal relationships on the team too. And I in a way, because we talked to Cam Dewberry, I think before the Wisconsin game, maybe it was before ULM, but he was talking about how he thinks the rotation is a good thing because it keeps guys fresh. You can come in late in the game and don't have as many reps on your legs. And I see that point of view of it. There are pros to it. But you would also think at some point you do want to settle in with the 5 guys you think are going to give you the best shot at winning the game. And who knows, Wilkin could come out and have the game of his life, blocking and pass protecting and run blocking and all that stuff. So we'll kind of see on Saturday.
Yeah, no, I just was curious as to your thoughts. Like I said, I think that battle has been one that I'm with you. I'm not usually a huge X's and O's guy. That's just one that has kind of jumped off the screen at me every game because, like I said, it's been one that's kind of gotten a lot of attention. So I was just curious as to your thoughts. I guess, and you don't have to fully, say hey, I think that Alabama, does this or that. But I know a lot of people have talked about Alabama's struggles on the road. And hey, how is this a difference? I'm, in my mind, I'm looking at this as I understand Alabama has struggled on the road, but Kalen DeBoer is also, the stat that everyone, talks about is 6-0 against Dan Lanning, Kirby Smart, and Steve Sarkisian. I look at it as some of the biggest games of his career. I was in Baton Rouge last season on the road. That was a huge game. Obviously, Alabama dominates. I think that Kalen DeBoer often coaches up to the big games. sometimes down to the smaller ones, to his detriment. But I'm of the mindset that the team's going to be fully, prepared and absolutely ready to go in Athens. Am I crazy in saying this? I know, like I said, I know a lot of people are kind of pointing to, they think that, oh, this is a road environment. This is going to be a really tough one, but I really give Alabama a little bit more of a chance in this one, not just a chance, but I think that they have a very good chance to win because of his success in big games. I think that Kalen kind of always shows that he's up to that challenge.
Yeah, something's got to give this weekend. They haven't been great on the road, but Kalen's been really good in big games, and Alabama's been really good against Georgia. So it's like something's got to give. And like you said, that LSU game last year, it seemed like, oh, they've really turned a corner, gotten, the bugaboo off their back about playing on the road. And really, my sisters made a good point this weekend. I have two sisters, and we all love football. That really, under Kalen, they've played really good, which there's a small sample size, but coming out of buys, because last year the Georgia game and the LSU game were both off buys. So, yes, this game is on the road, but they've had an extra week to prepare. I think because of what happened week one, it was a huge wake-up call. And they've talked about that. The players have talked about it. The coaches have talked about it, that they, the kind of the theme from the players and the coaches especially has been they've got to respond better to adversity on the road, that a lot of times they shy away or retreat, which is like kind of concerning for an Alabama football team, that like when adversity comes, they're retreating, but that's got to be the key on the road because they know it's going to happen. So how do you respond to that adversity? And so I don't think they're going to jump out 28-0 like they did last year. I'm sure it'll be a little closer than that. But then again, none of us expected that last year, and that's what happened. So, yeah, I think that the whole – like there obviously is some truth to the playing on the road thing because the record wouldn't be as bad as it's been over the last quarter of a season and a season. But, like, you do have those examples of LSU and Wisconsin that like they can do it. And LSU has one of the, obviously Alabama has historically had a lot of success in Baton Rouge, but that's one of the toughest environments in college football, and they killed LSU. So yeah, I think that the players, if there's been any sort of mental block on the road or after the Florida State loss, Kane talked about they've got to do a better job at protecting the sideline. And I'm not exactly sure what that means, or I think it's just kind of, he was talking about more the headspace they have to be in. But I would think after what happened week one and then having 2 whole weeks to get ready for this game, I don't think the playing on the road is going to be as big of a factor as some people are worried that it might be.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm also personally of the mindset that when you're talking about this game specifically, I think I would have been a little more concerned about this game had Georgia lost to Tennessee.
Yeah.
I really think that Georgia beating Tennessee was to Alabama's favor because I think that Kirby, after a loss, I would have put more faith in than DeBoer in a big game. Obviously, DeBoer hasn't lost in a big game, but again, Kirby, after a loss, I think that, the motivation and the level that he's able to get that team to, I think is generally on another level. And so I do think that there is some extra, hope that Alabama has in that standpoint is, some teams don't always learn from the close win because when there's a win on the scoreboard, you don't always fix the mistake that happened that really caused it to be as close as it was, right? And so I do think that is something that I'm personally thinking is going to make an impact, but I am very curious to see what happens in Athens. Obviously, it's going to be a huge weekend this weekend. I'm sure you will be there, but this is going to be a big one.
Yeah, I will be there. And I agree that I think if Georgia had lost, it would not have been good for Alabama. It was kind of a win-win for Alabama fans because Tennessee loses and then you don't have a super pissed off Georgia team.
I would absolutely agree with that. Well, the part of the reason why I brought you on today, and, I saw that you had announced, for those of you that are unaware about what Katie does, she's a writer for BamaCentral and SI. I know previously I interviewed Joe Gaither. I know he's also with BamaCentral. You have a lot of really great writers over there. And you had announced that you were going to be starting a new podcast called Crimson Flame. I wanted to see if you could give the listeners a little bit of an idea of what this is going to be about, because I think this is a little bit more of a unique take on the podcast space. Obviously, there are a ton of us that talk about football. That's kind of the bread and butter around here. I'm one of the more unique ones, given the fact that I talk about basketball as much as I do. But I feel like you have a very unique perspective on what you're going to be talking about. So please let the people know what you got going on.
Yeah, so the Crimson Flame podcast is going to be focused on women's athletics at Alabama. Obviously, some of the sports are more popular than others. And something I've told people for a long time, which I should probably fact check that this is still true, is that really Alabama softball, you could argue, is the second most popular sport on campus. Obviously, with different factors, you would say men's basketball, but for a long time, softball has had more followers on social media than men's basketball. There's a lot of people that care about Alabama softball because of the success they've had in the past. And so, obviously, softball is like the one that's really popular. There's some that most of you have never and will never watch a meet or a match or a regatta of for the rowing team or a track race or whatever. But there's still athletes that represent Alabama and that work really hard, and a lot of them are at the top of their sport, and that's why they're at Alabama. You look at cross country; has had individual national champions, individual SEC champions, and so there's really talented athletes all over campus that people maybe don't know as much about. So the podcast is going to be focused each week. We're going to do a recap of the past week's games, kind of the results, how Alabama's done. So like right now, it's soccer and volleyball season. Cross country has also started, and then we'll kind of have a main segment. Some weeks it'll be a guest, some weeks it won't. A lot of it will be current athletes, hopefully being able to talk about kind of what they're doing, how their team's doing, current coaches, former coaches and athletes, other media members that cover the teams or that cover women's sports, and then we'll kind of wrap up with the upcoming games for the week. So I've covered softball since 2021. I've covered gymnastics in some capacity since 2019. Some of the other sports I've covered at various times, and I've been to literally hundreds of games throughout growing up in college and post grad. So yeah, it's something. It is a little different that not other people are doing, but I know that the passion is there for the fan base and some of the teams, and then hopefully it'll give people a little more info about some of those other teams that maybe don't get as much attention.
Yeah, and you're absolutely not wrong when you're talking about softball. So I don't know if you knew this, but when I was in college, I worked for the ticket sales department on campus, and softball was like a very common like season ticket that we would have people like reaching out about. And today, I'm sure this is still the case. If you try to get season tickets for softball, the seats have been full for a very long time. You have to get seats in the Brickyard, which is out in the outfield, and then you can eventually work your way into the regular chairback seats. This is by far one of the most popular sports on campus. You're absolutely not wrong in that. You know, you could make an argument whether it's two or three, but still, it's absolutely one of the most popular things. Also, women's gymnastics, that is, something that generally when they have large meets, they fill up the arena. I have been to quite a few gymnastics meets when I was in college. This is a like you said, a set segment of the university that has a decent amount of fans, because obviously these meets, in most cases, I think Alabama for quite a few years has had the attendance record in terms of people actually attending the game. So it's obviously a well-liked sport, but it isn't something that is discussed. I may mention it in passing if something major happens, but even admittedly, I don't cover it as much as I should. So I know this is something that a lot of people will be interested in. So it's really, really cool that you're kind of taking to talk to some of these players, as well as talk about some of the athletics on campus that, as you said, aren't talked about. Because I know we did have a national champion, Doris Lemongold, won a national championship back-to-back seat, or was it three-peat or two-peat? It was either back-to-back or a three-peat.
Yeah. They have indoor and outdoor too, so they have spring season, all that stuff. So she's won a lot.
Yeah, so like she's won a ton, and like you have a lot of these people that some people may have never heard of. So I think it's really, really cool that you're doing that. So just to be absolutely clear, people can find that on the BamaCentral YouTube channel. Is that also going to be on your Twitter? Like, where are people going to be able to find that?
Yeah, I'll post the videos on the BamaCentral YouTube channel, and then also they will be on Spotify. You can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts as well. We'll see kind of the upload process for some of the other outlets. I feel like most people between Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, that should satisfy. But yeah, I'll tweet them out each week and kind of promote them that way. And it's really not like I understand why they don't get as much coverage, because like they don't necessarily like get as many clicks, and like in this industry that's just like what it is at the end of the day. Like our website, we have like an all things Bama section, and we do roll call where we kind of incorporate the scores from every team, but you just can't put in the man on the ground hours for every sport that happens on campus. And there's men's teams, too, that don't get a ton of coverage. It's just the way it is and what people are interested in. But kind of the goal in this is just getting some attention on some of those other teams and things that are doing well. And Alabama fans will support winners. I think you look at soccer when they made the Final Four a couple years ago and kind of how that attendance skyrocketed. That fans will, and that's why there's so much passion around softball and gymnastics, is because they've been winners. So the fans will, get attracted to things that win. And Alabama invests a lot of money in sports all around campus, even though the only ones that make money are football and men's basketball. And like you said, softball always has a long waiting list for those chairback seats. Murph is always trying to scheme stuff up to fit some more seats in the stadium, especially after Oklahoma built one that has a larger capacity. But it'll be in all those places on social media.
Perfect. Yeah. And for anybody that's interested, I will be sure to link her introductory podcast as well as the BamaCentral YouTube channel down in the comments. So if anybody is interested, if you're looking for that, I will be sure to have that as well as her Twitter and everything linked in the comments. So feel free to, go ahead and follow Katie over there as well as see the episodes over there. I want to thank you so much for joining the show. I really do appreciate it. Hope that everyone checks out your new adventure with Crimson Flame. We will see how Alabama does in Athens this weekend. I know we have a huge one. And then over on the basketball front, selfishly, I'm a season ticket holder for basketball and, have went to the Final Four and, consider myself that's more of what I'm a sicko for. So I'm definitely very excited to see, what happens and what Alabama's able to do in Jalil Bethea's absence. But I really want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. For everybody who is watching, thank you so much. If you're not currently subscribed, if you could do so, I would appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and we will catch you in the next episode. Peace.